Well, sadness is not the problem, yet being alone with it is. There is something important I want to say about sadness. Sadness is not the problem. Sadness is part of being human. We feel sad when we lose something. We feel sad when a relationship changes. We feel sad when somebody disappoints us. We feel sad when we feel rejected, left out, overlooked, or unloved. We feel sad when life does not unfold in the way we hoped it would. And very often, that sadness is entirely appropriate to our circumstances. The problem is not that we feel sad. The problem begins when we are alone with our sadness. And for some people, that experience of being alone with sadness is deeply familiar. It began a long time ago, perhaps when you were a child. Sadness was not something that another person entered into with you. You may have been upset, frightened, disappointed, or lonely, but nobody really noticed. Or perhaps they noticed, but did not know how to respond. You may have been told, "Stop crying, don't be silly, there's nothing to be upset about, you're too sensitive." Or perhaps nothing was said at all. Perhaps your feelings simply happened in emotional isolation. And this matters enormously because a child does not only need food, shelter, and physical safety, a child also needs emotional accompaniment. When a child is sad, they need another person to enter that emotional space with them, not necessarily to fix it, not necessarily to make the sadness go away and disappear, but to communicate. I see you. I know this hurts. I'm here with you. You don't have to experience this by yourself. This is what emotional attunement, parental mirroring, and co-regulation provide. The child gradually learns, I can feel sad and still remain connected. I can hurt and somebody stays. My feelings do not make me unacceptable. I do not have to manage emotional pain completely alone. Over time, those experiences become internalized. The loving parent gradually becomes what therapists call an introject. An introject is, in simple terms, an internalized version of a relationship. After enough experiences of being comforted, understood, and emotionally mirrored, the child begins to carry something of that parent inside themselves. Eventually, when the actual parent is absent, an internal voice can say, "It's okay to be sad. This is difficult. Come here. Let's stay with this together. You don't have to solve anything yet. I'm with you. You're not alone." That becomes part of what I call the inner nurturing parent. But many people did not have enough of those experiences. They may never have had a sufficiently loving, attuned, and emotionally available parent to become strongly introjected. And something else may have developed instead. A dominant internal parental voice that may be critical, dismissive, demanding, or neglectful, rather than an internal parent who approaches sadness, an inner critic may withdraw from it or attack it. So sadness appears and the internal response becomes, get over it, stop feeling sorry for yourself. Why are you like this? You're weak. You shouldn't need anybody. And sometimes the inner critic is not obviously cruel. Sometimes it is simply neglectful. It offers nothing. It just disappears. And once again, the person finds themselves experiencing sadness in exactly the way they may have experienced it as a child, alone and in isolation. And this is why some emotional reaction can feel so disproportionate. The sadness itself may belong to the present, but the aloneness surrounding the sadness belongs to the past. It's a form of despair. Somebody may disappoint you today. A relationship may end. A friend may not call. You may feel excluded. You may spend a weekend by yourself. The sadness may be entirely understandable, but underneath it is something much older. I am alone again. Nobody is coming. I have to deal with this by myself. And that is what I call an unaccompanied emotion, in this case, sadness. But there is another important consequence of this. Human beings do not like being left alone with emotional pain. So if we have not developed an adequate internal capacity to accompany ourselves, we naturally begin looking outside ourselves for something that will do it for us. We search for something that will soothe us, hold us, reassure us, distract us, or make the feeling disappear. Sometimes we look to relationships. We may desperately need to be with another person to reassure us that we are loved. We become frightened when they withdraw. We need another message or another phone call, another sign that everything is okay. The relationship can gradually become less about loving another person and more about regulating what happens inside us when they are absent. Sometimes we look to achievement, overwork, status, approval. If I stay busy enough, perhaps I won't feel it. If people admire me enough, perhaps I won't feel so alone. If I achieve the next goal, perhaps something inside me will finally settle. Some people find comfort in religion or spirituality. And of course, faith can provide genuine meaning, community, hope, and profound emotional support. There is nothing inherently unhealthy about that. But even religion can sometimes become an attempt to outsource an internal psychological function. We may look exclusively to God, a church, a spiritual leader, or a belief system to provide the loving parental presence we do not yet know how to provide for ourselves. The external source of support is not necessarily the problem. The problem arises when all emotional regulation has to come from outside because there's no sufficiently developed nurturing presence inside. And then there are strategies that are much more destructive. Alcohol, drugs, gambling, compulsive eating, shopping, pornography, overwork, social media, or repeated intense relationships. These behaviors are often described simply as addictions, but psychologically, it can be useful to ask a different question. What is this behavior doing for the person? Very often, at least temporarily, it changes how they feel. Alcohol may soften loneliness, gambling may replace emptiness with excitement, compulsive relationships may temporarily silence abandonment. Drugs may anesthetize emotional pain, constant activity may prevent us ever having to sit quietly enough to discover how alone we feel. And this is why simply removing a coping strategy can sometimes be so difficult. Because underneath, it may be the original problem. The person has never learned how to be with themselves when they hurt. Take away the alcohol, take away the gambling, take away the relationship, take away the endless busyness, and suddenly there is the inner child again, sitting alone with their sadness. So the therapeutic task cannot simply be stop doing that. We also have to ask what will replace the emotional function the behavior was performing. And this brings us back to the inner nurturing parent. The aim is to not to stop receiving support from other people. We need relationships, we need friendships, we need community. Some people need faith. We are relational beings. But healthy external support works best when it is accompanied by an internal relationship. We learn to look inside as well as outside. So when sadness comes, instead of immediately reaching for another person, another drink, another bet, another distraction, another achievement, or another reassurance, we begin by turning inward. We ask, what is happening inside me? Who is hurting? And who is with them? Imagine sadness as an emotional room. Your inner child is sitting in that room, perhaps frightened, perhaps crying, perhaps confused, perhaps simply very quiet. The old psychological pattern is that nobody enters that space, or the inner critic enters and says, what's wrong with you? You're making too much of this, pull yourself together. Or perhaps we run from the room altogether and reach for something outside of ourselves, a person, a substance, a distraction, anything that means we don't have to sit there. But healing involves doing something different. We invite the inner nurturing parent into that room. And the nurturing parent does not arrive with solutions. They do not say, stop being sad. They do not say, everything will be fine. Sometimes we do not know whether everything will be fine. Instead, they say, I can see how sad you are. I can see this really hurts. And I'm staying here with you. That changes the emotional experience. There is still sadness, but now there's also relationship. There is a witness, there is companionship, there is emotional holding, there is a shared experience. Instead of I'm sad and alone, the experience becomes I'm sad and somebody is here with me. And that somebody is an internal nurturing presence. For people who did not develop a sufficiently loving parental introject during childhood, this can feel very unfamiliar. The voice of the inner nurturing parent may initially feel artificial. The neglectful or critical introject may be much stronger. It may have occupied the psyche for decades. So part of the work involves diluting the old introject, not necessarily destroying the inner critic, not declaring war on it, but reducing its authority. We begin saying, I hear that voice, but it's not the only voice available to me anymore. The critic no longer gets exclusive access to your inner child, and its dominance reduces. Psychological space opens. Into that space, we deliberately begin building a different introject, a nurturing one. At first, the language may be very simple. I'm here. You don't have to go through this alone. I know this hurts. You're allowed to be sad. I'm staying here with you. Sometimes you would put a hand on your chest while saying this. Sometimes you might imagine your younger self. Sometimes you might picture the nurturing parent physically entering your room, sitting beside your inner child, and simply remaining there, not fixing, not lecturing, not analysing, just accompanying. And when that happens repeatedly, something begins to change. The psyche develops a new expectation. Sadness no longer automatically means abandonment. Pain no longer automatically means isolation. And we no longer have to compulsively search the outside world for something to rescue us from our internal experience. We can still reach outward. We can call a friend. We can receive love. We can belong to a community. We can practice our faith. We can seek professional support, but we do so from a different position. We are no longer asking the outside world to perform the entire function of an absent internal parent. We have begun developing that relationship within ourselves. Perhaps this is one of the deepest aims of inner child work, not to remove sadness, not to become so self-sufficient that we no longer need anybody, and certainly not to create a life without painful feelings. It is to make sure that when painful feelings arrive, we do not abandon ourselves inside our feelings. The inner child feels, the inner nurturing parent accompanies, the adult understands, and gradually we move from an internal world organized around abandonment, neglect, and criticism towards one organized around relationship. So when sadness comes, perhaps do not immediately ask, how do I make this go away? And do not immediately ask, who can make me feel better? Ask first, who is with me in this feeling? And if the answer is nobody, invite your inner nurturing parent into that space. Let them sit beside your sadness. Let them witness it. Let them share it. Because sadness itself is not the problem. Being alone with sadness is the problem. And healing begins when the sadness becomes a shared and witnessed experience. If you'd like help with your emotional world, visit my website. Book a free discovery call. Let's see what's possible.